Welcome to History Hack. If you didn't know by now, we are the revolution. That means we're sharp, witty, lots of fun, but it also means that we're essentially the peasants in Les Mis huddled round a table in the corner of the bar with no money. If you enjoy the show, please do support us. We have a Patreon account by which you can donate a small monthly sum in appreciation of what you're hearing. Alternatively, we have Ko-fi, in which you can just do a one-off donation as a thank you if you particularly enjoy a certain episode. Either way, we massively appreciate all of your support. Hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, welcome to another episode of History Hack. You have me, and I'm totally flying solo today, but I don't mind because we're going to do something super fun, and I really enjoy this subject. The subject that I did at university a lot, so I'm kind of excited about this. But I don't really think I need to introduce my next guest because he's been on here so many times that I think he should have his own podcast on History Hack. And if you agree with this, just send us loads of messages and just be like, yes, he should have his own segment. So we have Jonathan Clements, who, well, like I said, he's been on History Hack so many times. Has talked about Empress Wu, the Pirate King. I don't know, Jonathan, you've done so much on History Hack that it's mind blowing.
I
But
actually forgot one. I thought, wow, I should get in touch with them and do a thing about weaponized music. And then it turned out I'd already done it with you and I just forgot.
hold on, you did another one. You did Confucianism as well.
Oh, yeah. And Chinese food. I did Chinese food as well as my first one.
Do you know what? I think we should just get you on to do this regularly because Chinese history isn't spoken about enough, especially in the Western world. But you're actually here to talk about, well, something different. We're talking about Taiwan. It's going to
Hmm.
be part of your new book, which is coming out in January 2024. But people are going to be able to pre-order this. Can you just let us know what is the name of this book that we're going to be talking about?
The book's called Rebel Island, The Incredible Story of Taiwan. And it is a history of Taiwan from prehistoric times right up to the election, which is coming up in January 2024, where the
Oh,
Chinese are sure to start throwing missiles across the strait and causing all kinds of trouble. Um, because, Taiwan is an incredibly delicate issue that no one should talk about because everyone gets into trouble for talking about it. But
well,
uh,
exactly. This is such a hot topic right now, especially even places like Eastern Europe to do with like the Russia thing and Ukraine and everything else. Taiwan is at the top of our list as well. It's like what is happening there is also going to affect what's going to happen in Russia. It is just so chaotic. So you're on topic right now. You've got a really hot topic book coming out. So hopefully people will learn a little bit more about Taiwan. I haven't done anything from this time period. I worked a little bit on later Taiwan, so hopefully I'm going to learn something new and exciting. So you basically, it's all about 1867. This is where we're kind of like kicking this off. And you've got an American merchant vessel. What is happening here? Why are the Americans in in Taiwan or in China at this point anyway?
Well, I mean, the historical reasons for people being there is a matter of something that crops up in almost every book I write, which is technological determinism. I just love the way that in new inventions change the way that history works and the requirements of history. Um, and there's a philosopher called Paul Virilio who talks about something called the integral accident, which is that every time you invent a new piece of technology, something new can get cocked up. So, until there was email, there was no spam. And until there were trains, there were no train wrecks. And until there were ships, there were no shipwrecks. Um, and what we get in the 19th century is the technology of the coal-powered ship, which suddenly makes the world so much smaller. And so you have, in 1850, you have Herman Melville in Moby Dick saying the steamships, the whalers, are knocking on the doors of Japan. And he was right within 4 years that, in fact, because the Americans are taking over the Pacific, they're looking for places to trade, they're looking for coal ports for their whalers. Um, they start pushing themselves on the countries on the coast. They say we need a place for coal, we need a place for our safe place for our sailors to go, and so on. And the same thing is happening from the other side because you have all the European countries showing up in the Far East. Hong Kong becomes a British possession in after the Opium Wars. P&O ferries start shipping stuff to Hong Kong in 1854. There is a huge number of foreign ships around the coasts of China and Japan that simply weren't there before. And the thing is that this is lawless territory. This is wild. There are no lighthouses. There's no deals in place to deal with sailors who are shipwrecked or ships that run out of coal or fuel or anything. And so between 1861 and 1867, for example, 28 British or American ships sunk in Chinese waters.
28.
28. Actually, not even Chinese waters. This is Taiwanese waters.
Holy
so
shit.
so you have all of these ships desperately trying to get involved in the commerce and the trade that's available to them now, as China is forced open after the Opium Wars. And the case that we're really talking about today in 1867 is the Rover, which was it's a merchant vessel which is sailing up the coast of China, and they don't really want to get too close to the coast of China because it's so dangerous. So they figure, oh, we'll go round the back. We'll sail around the outside, around Taiwan, stay out of trouble. We're a steamship. We can do that. Of course, the trouble is that in the south of Taiwan, there are 10 miles of reefs underwater. A place called the Seven Sisters is particularly dangerous. They're called the Seven Sisters because at low tide you can see 7 of them. At high tide you can only see about 2, and that's what the rover ran into. There was supposed to be a survey of the area, but no one really. They kind of fudged it and went, that'll be fine. No one's going to sail here anyway. So the rover is going up the coast of Taiwan, and the captain, Captain Hunt, Joseph Hunt, is looking at his charts, and it just goes, oh, don't go there, there's some reefs. And he's like, oh, we'll risk it. And the rover smashed into a reef and got a hole in its hull and started to tip over. And so the crew of the rover, including his wife, Mercy Hunt, they all cram themselves into these lifeboats, and it's a 17-hour rowing trip to get to the coast, because it's 10 miles, it's 10 kilometers of reefs. And so they're quite a way out from the island, and they have to row against these very powerful currents, because Taiwan's like a leaf shape. So you've got the Pacific kind of ramming itself in on either side of this kind of fork, this kind of land-shaped fork. And after 17 hours, they kind of slosh ashore on this beach. And there is a tribeswoman, I suppose you call it. There's a native Paiwan, a Koalat Paiwan tribeswoman on the beach staring at them like, what the fuck are you doing here? And Mercy Hunt, the captain's wife, she figures, well, sisters, we're in this together. I'm sure we can hammer something out. And she goes up to this woman and she goes, hello, as you can see, we've been shipwrecked. I've got some money here and I want to give you this money. Could you find someone to help us get back to civilization? No offense, but civilization. And the woman just stares at her and then kind of runs off. And she goes, and so they don't know what's going to happen. The woman comes back with an army of warriors, and they kill almost everyone from the rover. They kill her, they kill her husband, they kill the 14 white American crew members of the ship, all of the Chinese crew. 1 or 2 of them get away. There are different accounts. And so this single, or these 2 survivors, managed to make it back to a Chinese village, a village of Chinese settlers on Taiwan. And they explain what's happened. And so the news gets out that the rover, the crew of the rover, have been massacred. And this has happened a number of times before, but the rover is a particularly important incident because of the captain's wife, because Mercy Hunt comes from a very rich family, and they assume, they presume that she's dead. But they say, we want to give her a Christian burial. We will offer $2,500 for the return of her remains. And to put that in context, that's what a working man would earn in a year in 1867. So suddenly, this is an incident that attracts a lot of interest from a lot of literal gold diggers.
I'm a little bit stunned with this whole typical, I don't want to say typically American, because everyone's going to like launch themselves at me. But it's just so American to just go, hi, we've got a problem. No idea who you are. Here's a load of money. Sort it out for us.
Well, I think that is unfair in this case, because I think that's a very European attitude as well. We, as Europeans, as inheritors of European culture, have a vague sense of the law of the sea, which is something that has been kind of bubbling up since the time of Justinian. This idea that if you are shipwrecked, people are obliged to help you. And that ties into all kinds of other things. There's an international agreement today between countries that you will come to someone's aid in an emergency. And tied into that as well is another concept, which is also quite European, of the law of salvage. That if someone's ship is in trouble and you help them, you are entitled to a share of what that rescue is worth, and that's something that has to be kind of hammered out beforehand. And none of this exists on the coast of Taiwan. These are Koalut Paiwan people. They live in a very, very small area where and literally your head will get cut off by the enemy if you stray outside it. They have a very insular view. They certainly don't trust foreigners, particularly white people and Chinese people are the two things they really can't stand, because they've got Chinese settlers encroaching on their territory. They've got these white shipwrecks that keep ramming into the coast of their land and then starting fights for no reason. So yeah, I think you're being unfair to the Americans there. I think this is a very Anglo-American European attitude to adopt, and part of the problem with Taiwan in this period is that none of these rules apply there. And so as far as the American government, and indeed many of the other European governments are concerned, Taiwan is less of an island and more of a marine hazard.
Interesting. I mean, I'm kind of interested you touched on this a little bit more literally just moments ago, but why did they actually end up why did they kill them at the end of the day?
Well, the thing is, luckily in this particular case, we have kind of not a post-mortem. We have a report by the tribes people themselves, so we know exactly why this happened.
Wow, really?
Yeah, really, because of the events that unfolded after the rover, someone actually sat down with one of the Paiwan tribesmen and said, "Why did you do this?" And he goes, "Oh, well, I mean, since you ask," and he kind of reeled out this huge list of reasons. The first thing, very unluckily for the crew of the rover, they came ashore at exactly the wrong time. They came ashore at this seasonal event, this kind of ritual event, where the men of the Koalut Paiwan were obliged to take an enemy head in order to win a wife. And so, of all the days to come walking out of the sea and say, "Hi, we're from somewhere else," that was exactly the wrong day to do it. Also, the Koalut were deeply suspicious of foreigners. They had several encounters before with unnamed ships that had caused trouble for them. So they were very suspicious of white people anyway. As I said, they were very suspicious of the Chinese because there are Chinese settlers encroaching on their lands all the time. So those are some of the reasons. Ironically, the tribal areas, the tribal lands, are very, very small in this area, and it turned out that if they'd come ashore 300 yards down the beach, they would have been in a different tribal territory, where they would have been welcomed, given a cup of hot chocolate, and sent home. It's one of those like terrible disasters. And things actually got worse and worse for everybody, because as far as the tribe were concerned, their action was legitimate. And there's no legal basis to say that it wasn't. That's their land. You come ashore, they're in a head cutting offy kind of mood. You take your chances. However, among the Koalut Paiwan, there was a taboo not to kill women. And here's the thing: Mercy Hunt spent most of her days in these kind of big, crinoline dresses, like any other Victorian lady. But because her clothes got wet as they evacuated the ship, she was dressed as one of the sailors. She'd taken clothes from some of the crew. So she was dressed as a man. And the woman that she approached did not realize she was a woman, and neither did the people who attacked them. And so when the Paiwan eventually found out that they killed a woman, they were absolutely aghast, because cutting off the heads of men within their rules, that's fine. Killing a woman, that's going to bring a curse down upon them. So what actually happened then is that they took her body and they threw it outside the tribal territory. They kind of chucked it to the edge of the village, where some dogs started gnawing on the body. Which of course makes life even more difficult for reacquiring her remains. So all of these factors kind of come together in the incident around the rover, which just kind of added to the tension.
There must have been, as you've mentioned previously, a reaction by the Americans, the British, and everybody outside of Taiwan. I mean, even China must have had some sort of reaction to all of this.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, let's try and take it in chronological order. The British and the Americans both had kind of ships in the area, military ships in the area, and they kind of popped over to where the wreck site was and tried to come ashore. I suspect mainly because of the money. I mean, that's a lot of money that's on offer. So for someone to suddenly say, you know what, let's pop over and see if we can, teach those tribesmen a lesson. I mean, maybe it's something that occurs to you if you're just happens to be sailing past, but I think $2,500 is a lot of money. So they did try and get ashore. They were quite shocked by the reaction, because the Kowloon Paiwan were fantastic musketeers. They bought firearms from the Chinese settlers. They were really good with them, and they really knew the lay of the land as well. I mean, this is something that I didn't really appreciate till recently, but these hunting communities, every man of adult age has an area that he's supposed to hunt in. He has his little hunting ground, and no one else can go there. But hunting is not a case of wandering through the forest taking pot shots at deer. It's a long-term husbandry. They actually grow thickets to steer their prey in certain directions, and they plant crops in certain places to kind of lure in their prey. And so these American Marines kind of wandering ashore are actually wandering into an area that these tribesmen not only know intimately, but in some way have created. They've created these kind of kill zones. So it didn't go well for them. So as a result, the American consul in Xiamen, in the town that we now call Amoy on the coast of China, he was technically also responsible for Taiwan, because Taiwan at the time was supposedly part of the province of Fujian. And so the American consul tries to get the Chinese to say, well, we'll send someone to deal with it, and they don't. They kind of fob him off, and they say, well, we can't really, that part of the island isn't really under our jurisdiction. There's not a lot we can do about it. And in the end, he takes matters into his own hands. And this is a fantastic guy. He's one of those historical figures that you just can see him being the star of his own movie, or possibly the villain. His name was Charles Legendre, and he came from France originally, but he moved to America, where he enlisted in the army during the Civil War, and he served during the Civil War. Rose up very quickly through the ranks. Was very badly wounded. He was shot in the face, lost part of his nose and one eye. And at the end of it all, he ended up as the consul in China, and he's one of these, as you probably know, if you're a foreign-born American, you can never be president. So, this is why Arnold Schwarzenegger, kind of stopped at a certain level in his political career. And the same goes for Charles Legendre. He'd love to be a politician. He'd love to work his way up the ranks, but basically, consul in Fujian is as high as he can go. And so he has taken it upon himself to be the guy to solve this problem. And his bosses say to him, this isn't in your jurisdiction, do not get involved in this. He ignores them completely. He gets a permission to accompany a Chinese force that might be going to look for the Kowloon Paiwan. And then the moment that they get onto the ship to go there, he takes over and he leads this army into Kowloon Paiwan territory. And this is a man who's already been behaving very suspiciously. He's already been reprimanded for taking a little bit too much initiative when it comes to these sorts of things. But his finest hour, in many ways, is his dealings with the Kowloon Paiwan, because he arrives at the head of a very powerful force that's powerful enough to impress the Taiwan leaders, and so he actually gets to sit down with the leader of what turns out to be a confederacy of 18 different tribes.
Let's stick with Charles Legendre because
Mm-hmm.
oh, people can't see this, but I've been face palming so far, and I can just see this getting so much worse. So at the end of the day, is he the right man for the job, or is he just a total, utter moron?
There are very mixed feelings about this, Alina. There are a lot of people who seem very supportive of Charles Legendre. And I think there are periods in history, particularly when, colonialism and imperialism is not looked upon as a bad thing, where this kind of go-getting, proactive behavior on his part is praised. I mean, there's a little bit of Julius Caesar about him, in the kind of, well, I'm going to go off and do this thing, and if I win, then we've got another province, and if I lose, I'll be dead. He was an incredibly confident man. You might call him arrogant. It depends on how justified you think his confidence was. I've seen articles about him that are full of praise for his ability to sort out this issue, because in fact he does sort it out. He gets a deal with the tribesmen that if a ship is wrecked again, they can put up a red flag and the tribesmen will come to help them and they'll sort out the money later. So he does in fact achieve that. But he is obsessed with Taiwan as a strategic point of great value, and he thinks that a European or American power should take control of Taiwan and use it as a base. If the Chinese can't handle stuff there, the white people should step in and deal with it. And he's actually written a book called How to Deal with China, where he says this is how you should do it. And he's handed it around the international community in China, acting as if it's advice he's given to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State has told him to shut up, stop talking about this. You don't know what you're talking about. But Charles Legendre is on the case and he's going to sort this out. And when it comes to negotiations, so he reaches the location where this all happened, and it turns out that the local ruler is a man called Garuli Guj Chuk, although the Americans call him Toki Tok. He's this kind of 50-year-old figure who somehow managed to get 18 tribes to cooperate with each other in this kind of local confederation. And Toki Tok is the man who explains to him why this has happened and why the Koa at Taiwan are aggrieved. And he tries to help him kind of get together. They start looking for the personal effects of the crew members. They're like, well, we found Mercy Hunt's watch. We found Mercy Hunt's hairpiece. Oh, this is a leg bone. It might be her. So they're kind of trying to get stuff together. In the middle of negotiations, very famously, Legendre says, if you don't stop, causing trouble for me, I'm going to pluck out my own eye and I'm going to stick it on the table and it can watch proceedings. And when they continue to argue, he pulls out his fake eye and sticks it on the table. And this is very impressive to the tribe. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to maybe listen to this one now. It's not a negotiating tactic I would recommend, but it's the kind of nutball thing that Charles Legendre would do. I have to say, when I first heard about him, I found him to be quite an objectionable figure. But I hear so many people who are kind of in sly admiration for him that he's starting to win me over a bit these days.
He's a bit ballsy, isn't he, at the end of the day?
He's very ballsy, and a lot of the information that we know about him is only very recently available. His papers are at the Library of Congress, but he wrote this massive report about Taiwan, a huge, like 300-page book, which was only published, widely in 2012. So, a lot of the material around Legendre and his life is only really coming to light and coming into scholarship now.
At the end of the day, and I still stick to this, but obviously the Brits and the Americans and the Europeans just didn't. Why can't we just leave people alone? Just leave them alone to do their own thing and live their own lives with their own culture. Okay, so they massacred a load of people. In the West, yes, it's frowned upon, but to them, it was something completely and utterly. Why can't we just respect that?
Well, yes, I mean, the crew of the rover were intruding on the territory of the Taiwan. and this becomes a matter of international law. You see, I said there was a confederation, right? I said there's a group of tribes, and Toki Toki is their leader, and the Chinese are there saying we can't really be responsible for that part of the island. It's full of savages, their word, not mine. So it's not really Chinese territory. And so you have the foreign powers, particularly the Legendre, saying, could you say that again? It's not Chinese territory. This bit of the island doesn't belong to you. So if we were to show up there and like build a base and stuff, you wouldn't object. And the Chinese are, oh, did we say no? We didn't mean that. No. So there's that kind of gotcha game going on about this part of the island. If there's a concept I think which the British came up with in India of the doctrine of lapse. If you can't look after your own land, we'll come and look after it for you. You know, so there's that kind of attitude underway as well. But aside from the fact that our shipping has now developed to the point where it's good enough to get you to Taiwan, but not good enough to not smash into it, there's this other issue of why people are encroaching on their lands in the first place. There are settlers from mainland China who are building little villages and farming crops and hunting in lands that, as far as the Taiwan are concerned, belong to them. Also there is a commodity in Taiwan which is constantly attracting more and more unwelcome encroachments on tribal lands. I mean, basically Taiwan is divided between east and west. The western side of Taiwan is where all the towns are and where the settlements have been for the longest. The eastern side is tribal land, and the reason that people are crossing the mountains, are going into these tribal lands, the number one reason is, believe it or not, camphor.
You're joking.
And camphor, because camphor, you might associate it with rather hot massage patches or with insect repellent or something like that. But camphor, throughout the later 19th century, becomes increasingly important as a commodity because it's a crucial ingredient in early plastics, it's a crucial ingredient in celluloid, and it's vital for smokeless gunpowder. And something crazy like 80% of the world's camphor trees are in Taiwan. And here's the thing as well: when you harvest camphor, you need to get a camphor tree, you cut it down, you smash it up into wood chips, and you bake those wood chips so that the camphor oil comes off, and that's how you collect it. And of course, what this does is it destroys the tree. So then you've got to go and find another tree. And so the camphor foresters are moving further and further inland. And there's no plantation. You can't just, make a tree spring up a year later. You've got to find these 100-year-old trees. So they're moving more and more on tribal lands. The Chinese regard camphor wood as lumber, therefore it comes under the jurisdiction of the Chinese Navy, and you're not allowed to harvest it. So people are harvesting it anyway, and that makes it illegal. So they're outlaws. So they don't care about the laws anyway. So they're shooting any tribes when they run into. And this is what is generating this constant gyre of things getting worse and worse on the edge of jurisdiction, Chinese jurisdiction.
Right, we're going to talk about another shipwreck. This time we're not talking about the West, we're not talking about steamships, we're talking about fishing boats. So in 1871, something goes wrong. And because there's something goes wrong, why are the fishermen not protected at this point?
Right, so Legendre gets this deal. He shakes hands or whatever.
Hold on, he's back. He's now back.
Oh no! This is what Legendre arranges. Legendre was actually still in place when the second shipwreck happened.
Okay.
But he left office soon afterwards. He gets this deal with Toki Tok that if a ship gets wrecked on the coast, they can fly a red flag and tribesmen will understand. And Toki Tok goes, "Yep, fine. That's good. That's fine." I mean, I don't think the Botan people are going to listen because they never pay attention to me, but everyone else is going to play along. That'll be fine. And so, that works out. That works out very well. But the ship that gets wrecked in 1871 is a fishing boat from the Ryukyu Islands. So the crew are all Japanese, the Okinawan fishermen, and they come ashore and they are kind of welcomed, but it's we're dealing with an impenetrable language barrier and we're dealing with a tribe of people who are overloaded by the presence of several dozen new arrivals. They don't necessarily have the food to give them, you know. It's not clear who's paying for what. And you get this sense that the fishermen do a kind of dine, and as far as the tribesmen are concerned, they do a kind of dine and dash, and they take some food off these people, and then they try and leave without paying, and they get massacred. And so the Japanese are now showing. So in fact, one of Legendre's last acts as the consul was to say, I think we should send another force over and establish that Japanese people are also entitled to the same protections. And in fact, he hopes to go along and do that. And but he's shortly afterwards he's leaving office in a hurry, and doesn't get to actually do that. So the Japanese are left with this problem, and it takes several years for them to work out how to deal with it. They send an envoy to China saying we want reparations for this. The Chinese say, well, we're not really responsible for that part of the island. And so eventually the Japanese send a military force. A man called Saigo Tsugumichi leaves Tokyo with a very, very large military force. So large, in fact, they have to make several trips to kind of ship all the stuff, which causes trouble, because when people ask him to leave, he said, I haven't got enough boats to leave. You know, I've got, you know, all this stuff. And they actually land on the southern coast of Taiwan and march into the hinterland and start fighting the local tribes. And this becomes very controversial, because the Chinese are there saying, we do not want you on our land, and the Japanese are saying, well, you said it wasn't your land, so we're just kind of sorting out our own policing here.
But hold on, isn't this completely illegal to kind of, because in theory they kind of invade Taiwan, don't they?
Yes, it is. So the attitude of the Japanese was, this is a policing action. The Chinese have abrogated responsibility. The attitude of the Chinese is, we own Taiwan. You're not supposed to invade our country. We didn't ask you to come here. And the language of a policing action is incredibly nuanced and incredibly delicate. We see it in Finland in 1939, when the Finns proclaim the People's Republic of Finland, and then invite the Russians in to help them put down rebels. We see it in Ukraine, when we have all of these little states that declare themselves to exist down the eastern side of Ukraine, and then they invite the Russians in to help. And so what the Japanese are doing is they're saying, well, we're here at the invitation of the Chinese, and the Chinese are going, we didn't invite you. And so this is going on at a diplomatic level, and it becomes quite controversial, because the transport ships the Japanese are using aren't all Japanese. One of them is English, one of them is American. And so the American envoy shows up and he says, we do not approve of any American personnel serving in a Japanese military action that it constitutes an invasion of Taiwan. And Saigo Tsugumichi had 2 American military advisors, and they were technically not allowed to be with him. And there's a ship called the New York, which was supposed to be a transport ship moving men and materiel to Taiwan for Saigo's expedition. And the Americans showed up and impounded it. They said, you cannot send this ship. It is a contravention of American law for you to assist in this unsanctioned military action. And the Japanese, fantastically, had already paid for the ship. And so they ended up suing the American government in California for breaking their contract. And funnily enough, they didn't get very far, and the case was thrown out. But they were so aggrieved and took such umbrage that they weren't actually allowed to use this American ship. They did actually take legal action back in the States.
Who actually comes up with this whole scheme? Because my head's hurting.
Okay, well,
this is manic. It's so insane that you would not think logically to do anything like this.
No, it would take a crazy person to come up with that idea, wouldn't it?
Yeah, like our friend Charles. Funnily
enough, Alina, when the Japanese show up in Beijing to talk to Li Hongjiang, who's the leading official in charge of foreign affairs, Li Hongjiang is absolutely incensed that they've brought a white man with them. He's like, this is an Asian issue. We're supposed to be settling this ourselves. who the fuck is this guy? And the Japanese say, this is Charles Legendre. He's our new advisor.
Oh, dear God
He had to
almighty.
leave his previous job in China under a bit of a cloud, but he is now the advisor to the Japanese government on Taiwanese Aboriginal affairs. And he says that we should go and attack this island. And in fact,
No.
so they have this huge argument, and Legendre is there. He's waiting for the gotcha moment. He's waiting for Li Hongjiang to say, "Well, we're not really responsible for that part of the island." And the moment he says it, it's like whack, let off a klaxon. Now we can do it. You've given up your rights to a third of that island, and we're going to take it over ourselves. And Charles Legendre actually wants to go with the Japanese expedition himself, but he's arrested by his own government in Shanghai. Because he's interfering in a way that the Americans really don't want him to. And so it's unfortunately the nutter who came up with that scheme is the same nutter who came up with the previous scheme. This is what I find so fascinating about Charles Legendre, is that he is this shadowy figure for a decade, steering Japanese foreign policy. All of these imperialist decisions that late 19th century Japan is making, which the Japanese get pilloried for by historians, are actually from the playbook of Charles Legendre, who's only working for them because the Americans wouldn't do what he wanted.
I'm surprised, but not surprised
Not
at the same
surprised, yeah,
time.
exactly.
So talk to us about, I mean, at the end of the day, I think this is a failure, clearly, but is it?
Well, the mission itself was a failure. The Japanese were they lost quite. I mean, there are one or two war prints from the period of the Japanese valiantly fighting the tribesmen, but they lost most of their men to disease because they were ill-equipped, and the Japanese army notoriously at the time was ill-equipped to deal with sanitation, and in fact, malaria and various other afflictions killed many more Japanese on this mission than the local tribesmen did. And so the Japanese kind of went home with the tail between their legs after a while, and little more was said about it. So in that sense, yes, the expedition was a failure. However, it had a very sneaky and underhand after effect, which was that the Ryukyu Islands are this long chain of islands that go from Japan all the way down to Taiwan, and they were a tributary kingdom of China. And for hundreds of years, but also because they were a bit dodgy, they were also a tributary kingdom of Japan. So the Ryukyu Islands had always existed in this kind of liminal space where they were kind of Chinese and kind of Japanese. If the Chinese had had, I think, a greater military presence, they could have said, the fishermen from the Ryukyu Islands are Chinese subjects. This is an internal matter. Piss off. But that didn't seem to occur to them. Instead, when the Japanese showed up and said, you killed some of our fishermen, we're going to deal with this, the Chinese entered negotiations as if that original premise was true. And so what that effectively did is it cut the Ryukyu Islands off from China. And within 10 years, the Ryukyu Islands were a Japanese province. They were the Okinawa prefecture and have remained part of Japan ever since. So the invasion of Taiwan didn't achieve anything in Taiwan, but it became a very handy lever for basically the official Japanese takeover of the Ryukyu Islands.
You've kind of not answered something, but I've got to backtrack on this actually a little bit. I'm a little bit annoyed.
Mm-hmm.
I do love you really, but I'm a little bit annoyed because you haven't answered one thing, because you kind of stopped at a really important point, and I've only just clocked it right now that you haven't. Right. Did anyone ever collect the reward for the bones of Mercy Hunt?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think there was enough of Mercy Hunt left to collect. But the thing is that the story about her disappearance and the reward and this kind of gotta catch them all assembly of all the bits and pieces from the ship achieved this very, very powerful status in local legend. And so it became a kind of a matter of tribal law. Rather fantastically, there was one guy showed up at one of the villages and offered the villagers the princely sum of $15 if they would give him the bones of Mercy Hunt. And the villagers were like, we hear it's a lot more than that, and we don't have them anyway. We think that the dogs have got one of her feet. But anyway, so years later, when I say years later, I mean in 1931, somebody found a skeleton on the beach at Kunding in South Taiwan. And it wasn't Mercy Hunt, it was some anonymous person. There have been many, many shipwrecks on the coast. So much so that they have a temple there to the Lords of 10,000 Responses, which is the hungry ghosts of people who are lost at sea. And so these bones were someone foreign sailor had been washed up on shore. Who knows when, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, they took the bones and they put them in the temple to the Lords of 10,000 Responses. And someone said, "Oh, I know who that is. That's that red-haired woman. That's that princess who was shipwrecked here." And they're like, "I'm sorry, we don't know what you're talking about." Because I know the story. Hang on, it's on the tip of my tongue. There was a shipwreck, and there was a red-haired princess, and someone had to collect her stuff, and like she's got clogs, and she's got a hat, and we have to bring them all together, otherwise we'll be cursed. And so this becomes a temple to someone called the Princess of the Eight Treasures, and it's an incredibly garbled story made from all kinds of misprisions and mishearings. I mean, I've told you the story of Mercy Hunt. You know who she is. I don't know if she had red hair or not, but Angmo, red hair, is a microaggression in Asia for foreigners. The red-haired people are the Dutch and the English and
Don't tell
the
Chris
Americans.
that. Poor Chris, our little red-haired man.
Well, they'll tell him that himself if he ever goes there. So you've got this very garbled story that someone was lost and she was important and we had to get stuff together, actually becomes the site of a temple in South Taiwan. And then in 2008, there's this old lady who's clearly losing her marbles, who gets lost in the woods for several days. And when she comes out, she says, "The red-haired princess appeared to me. She was naked and she tried to steal my clothes." And she says, "8 of us are going to die unless we, get her stuff together." So there's this kind of entire local industry about fueling this kind of the worship of the Princess of the Eight Treasures. There was a book written about her explaining who she was, which was complete nonsense. It said she was a Dutch girl in the 1600s who was off to meet her fiance at Fort Zeelandia, and none of it's true. But by 2015, one of the spirit mediums in the area has said, "I've just had a word with the Princess of the Eight Treasures," and she says she's happy now and she's become a goddess.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so happy ending, really.
A happy ending for the spiritual medium that probably got paid to say these sorts of things.
You're very cynical.
Oh, this has been really interesting. But what we're going to do, we are going to get you back to do more Taiwan
All
in
right.
a couple of weeks' time. So when your book comes out, we'll do a little bit more. We'll get another recording in to talk a bit more about this because there's so much to do. Oh, and one more question before we do finish. Can you actually go and visit this temple?
Yeah. It's still there. It's in it's not far from Kunding, which is a tourist resort now. I mean, the beach where this all happened is now it's got people sunbathing on it. So there's a whole kind of local industry of surfing and swimming and little fish restaurants and stuff. What you can't do is go diving because the currents at the Seven Sisters are so dangerous that the local diving schools won't take people there. So even today it's hazardous to people. Although they do have a lighthouse there now, which was finally put in place after intense foreign pressure.
I am dying to go to Taiwan, so that's definitely on my list of places to go. So thank you for that. And we will get you back. But do remind our listeners in the meantime, if they want to pre-order a copy of your book, do remind them what the name of the book is.
It's called Rebel Island, The Incredible Story of Taiwan. And that's just the preface, what we've covered today.
Perfect. So we will get you back on pretty soon, hopefully, and we'll talk a little bit more about Taiwan. So thank you so much, Jonathan. We will also get that book in our bookshop, but until probably the next recording, we will get that up there. So Chris usually does this spiel. I'm not very good. It's like, don't buy from the rainforest company, and because then Jonathan gets a better cut and we get a better cut. And it's, yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.